Welcome to the Midnight Mind. Subscribe if you're new here, and if you enjoy this kind of content, hit the like button too. It really helps. You know what time it is? It's midnight. It's time to enter the mind of Carl Jung. Have you ever felt that your mind never truly rests? That even in silence, 1,000 thoughts run beneath the surface, analysing, dissecting, reaching for something deeper than most people seem to care about? If so, you already know the paradox of being a deep thinker. You see too much, you feel too much, and yet you often find yourself trapped inside your own understanding. Carl Jung once warned that to become conscious is a terrible thing. He was right. Awareness cuts both ways. Jung believed that those who think deeply are walking a dangerous edge. The light of consciousness reveals not only truth, but also shadow. To know yourself is to meet everything inside you, the noble and the grotesque, the divine and the monstrous. Most people flee from this confrontation, choosing distraction and conformity. But the true thinker can't look away. The result? A life of inattention, often mistaken for wisdom when it's really quiet suffering. The mind that sees too clearly begins to decay if it isn't grounded. Jung saw this in his patients, brilliant men and women lost in abstraction, detached from life, seeking meaning while ignoring their instincts. He called it the danger of the inflated consciousness. The moment you mistake thought for life, you begin to wither. The intellect becomes a cage built from your own insights. The tragedy of the deep thinker is not ignorance, but isolation from experience. This is why Jung's warning still matters today. The world celebrates intelligence, analysis, and self-awareness, but few understand their cost. Every deep thinker must confront the same silent enemy, the overgrown mind that consumes its own roots. If you want to preserve your sanity and your soul, there are 7 things you must stop doing. Each one seems harmless, even virtuous, but together they pull you away from reality and closer to the abyss Jung called psychic disintegration. The first is overanalyzing everything. You believe that if you think long enough, you'll uncover the truth. But the truth isn't a puzzle to solve. It's a presence to experience. The more you dissect life, the further you drift from it. Jung wrote that analysis must lead to synthesis. Yet many thinkers never reach that point. They loop endlessly between possibilities, questioning every motive, every emotion, every word. Eventually, they stop living and start observing life like a scientist watching an animal in a cage, forgetting that they are the animal. When you catch yourself trapped in endless analysis, pause. Feel your body, your breath, your hunger. Remember that instinct is not the enemy of thought, it's the foundation. The deep thinker who refuses to feel becomes sterile, just as the emotional person who refuses to think becomes chaotic. To stop overanalyzing is to let life speak through you again, rather than dissecting it from above. Jung's warning is simple. The more you look inward, the more you must look outward, to balance the scales of the soul. The second thing is to stop carrying the world's weight. Many deep thinkers feel morally responsible for everything wrong in existence. You see the suffering, the hypocrisy, the blindness, and you ache to fix it. But that ache can become poison. Jung reminded us that the world will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, the world will tell you. The thinker who tries to heal the world without first knowing himself becomes a vessel of chaos. He projects his unresolved pain onto society, mistaking inner turmoil for moral duty. You can care deeply without collapsing under the burden of it all. Remember, consciousness expands through balance, not martyrdom. You're not here to save the world. You're here to understand it. And through that understanding, to become something solid enough that the world cannot corrupt you. Stop trying to carry what is not yours. Your task is to carry your own shadow, not the collective madness of the age. The third danger is seeking meaning in everything. Randomness feels intolerable. You want every event, every dream, every silence to mean something profound. But Jung cautioned that meaning makes a great many things endurable, perhaps everything. The paradox is that the search for meaning can become another form of avoidance. You start interpreting, instead of living. You find symbols instead of sensations. The universe becomes a riddle, and you the prisoner of your own curiosity. There is beauty in meaning, but there is also peace in mystery. When every experience must be decoded, spontaneity dies. Jung believed that the unconscious doesn't speak only in symbols. It speaks through instinct, art, love, and movement. These are forms of knowing that transcend interpretation. A true thinker doesn't cling to meaning. He dances with it. He lets it emerge, dissolve, and return without demanding permanence. Sometimes what feels meaningless is exactly what the soul needs to rest. The fourth trap is mistaking isolation for independence. Many deep thinkers pride themselves on their solitude. You withdraw from the noise, the trivial conversations, the shallow laughter. At first it feels noble, like guarding the sanctity of your mind. But Jung saw that too much isolation feeds the shadow. The ego begins to inflate, whispering that you are different, superior, misunderstood. You start to resent others, forgetting that the psyche can only grow through relationship. Without mirrors, even the darkest thinker forgets what he looks like. Solitude is sacred when it serves renewal, not withdrawal. Use it to cleanse your perception, not to prove your purity. Jung taught that the soul develops through encounter, with people, art, conflict, even suffering. The danger is to become an island, floating above the sea of life. Every philosopher who lost himself in madness began this way, mistaking separation for strength. True depth doesn't reject connection, it transforms it. You must learn to think deeply among others, not just apart from them. These are the first four poisons of the deep thinker. They appear intellectual, even virtuous, but they corrode the bridge between mind and soul. Overanalyzing replaces living. Carrying the world replaces knowing yourself. Seeking meaning replaces presence. Isolation replaces communion. Each one leads the thinker further from the living center of existence, toward the sterile light of thought without heart. Jung's warning was not against thinking deeply, but against forgetting that thought is meant to serve life, not replace it. When we go further into the psyche, we uncover the final 3 habits that destroy deep thinkers from within. These are the subtlest traps, so disguised as wisdom that even the most self-aware fall into them. But if you can recognize them, you can begin to reclaim your balance. Because depth without grounding becomes madness, and wisdom without humility becomes pride in disguise. The deeper your mind goes, the more invisible your descent becomes. Most deep thinkers don't collapse suddenly, they drift. Their fall looks like brilliance from the outside, a growing obsession with knowledge, a hunger for precision, a restless drive to understand everything. But Jung knew that the mind has its own gravity. The more energy you feed it, the more it consumes. The thinker begins as a seeker of truth and ends as a worshipper of thought itself. This is the 5th thing you must stop doing: mistaking knowledge for wisdom. Knowledge multiplies facts, wisdom unites them. Knowledge gathers, wisdom integrates. Jung saw that modern man suffers from a disease of knowing, an endless accumulation of data that drowns the soul in fragments. He warned that we live in a time when man believes himself fabulously capable of great deeds, yet he does not know what to do with himself. The intellect becomes swollen, brilliant, but empty. You start believing that insight alone brings transformation, forgetting that change begins only when knowledge touches the heart. To stop this decay, you must practice what Jung called active imagination, the union of intellect and intuition. It means engaging your inner world not as a scholar, but as a participant. Reflect on ideas, but also live them. Let them shape how you speak, how you love, how you suffer. Wisdom is not what you know, it's what you embody. The deep thinker who hoards ideas becomes like a miser with coins, wealthy in knowledge, impoverished in spirit. Jung's warning was clear: an inflated mind without a grounded soul leads to psychosis. The 6th danger is one of the most seductive: romanticizing your darkness. Deep thinkers often mistake melancholy for depth, pain for insight, and cynicism for intelligence. Jung described this as identification with the shadow. The thinker discovers the darker layers of the psyche: rage, envy, lust, despair, and instead of integrating them, he glorifies them. He wears them like armor, mistaking suffering for authenticity. But the shadow isn't meant to be worshipped. It's meant to be understood, contained, and transformed through consciousness. When you romanticize your darkness, you stop healing. You become addicted to your own wounds. Every heartbreak becomes an excuse for detachment. Every disappointment, a reason to withdraw further. Jung warned that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That means you must face your pain without becoming it. You can acknowledge the abyss without living there. Real strength is not in brooding, it's in endurance. The thinker's task is not to glorify the night, but to carry a light through it. This is why Jung saw depression not as an enemy, but as a messenger. When your soul retreats into darkness, it's calling for integration, for the neglected parts of you to become brought back into the dialogue with your life. But too often, the deep thinker becomes loyal to his suffering. He mistakes pain for identity. You must stop feeding on your own despair. Let your insight illuminate your wounds, not deepen them. The mind is a labyrinth, and the shadow loves nothing more than to see you lost inside it, calling it depth. The seventh and final danger is the most subtle: believing you are awake when you are still dreaming. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Deep thinkers often mistake awareness for awakening. You read, you reflect, you understand, and you believe you've transcended the illusions that control others. But intellectual awareness is not transformation. The ego simply changes costumes. It replaces ignorance with pride, conformity with superiority, and it calls it enlightenment. The illusion of awakening is the thinker's final trap. You begin to see yourself as separate from the ordinary, looking down on the herd from your mental mountain. But this sense of distance is itself a symptom of the unconscious. You are not awake. You are dreaming of being awake. Jung observed that the ego resists genuine change because it fears death. So it creates a false light, a sense of specialness, to convince you that the journey is complete. True awakening is quieter. It dissolves the illusion of being special at all. To stop this, you must cultivate humility, not the moral kind, but the existential humanity. Remember that your conscious mind is only a small island in an ocean of unknown depths. Jung compared it to a little light surrounded by immense darkness. The more you know, the greater your responsibility to remain open, uncertain, and teachable. Real awakening feels less like triumph and more like surrender. The surrender of needing to understand everything. You awaken not by conquering the unconscious, but by learning to listen to it. These last three dangers, mistaking knowledge for wisdom, glorifying your darkness, and believing you're already awake, form a silent circle. Each one reinforces the other. The thinker who confuses intellect with growth becomes obsessed with control. The one who glorifies darkness becomes enslaved by it. And the one who believes he's awake stops seeking altogether. Together, they create what Jung called the inflation of consciousness, a spiritual sickness that looks like insight but ends in disconnection from life itself. Jung's patients often experienced this inflation after their first taste of deep awareness. They would glimpse the vastness of the psyche, the archetypes, the shadow, and believe that they had reached the summit of understanding. But the journey into the self never ends. It deepens. Jung reminded them that the way is not upward or downward, but inward. To go inward means constant confrontation, not comfort. It means dying to old certainties again and again. The moment you think you've arrived, the unconscious begins to pull you back into illusion. Deep thinking, at its highest form, is not about detachment. It's about intimacy with reality. An intimacy so raw that it humbles the intellect. Jung's life was proof of this. After his own psychological breakdown, he realized that the mind's purpose is not to escape the world, but to serve it. He began carving stone towers by hand, painting visions, grounding his intellect in creation. He knew that the soul demands participation, not observation. Thought becomes sterile without embodiment. The thinker must descend from his tower to touch the earth again. If you recognize yourself in these warnings, take them as signs of strength, not failure. You see what others ignore. You feel what others repress. But depth is not a virtue in itself. Without grounding, it becomes a curse. The mind can expand endlessly, but if the heart does not grow alongside it, consciousness collapses under its own weight. Jung's entire psychology was built on this balance, between light and shadow, reason and instinct, the individual and the collective. Every deep thinker must learn to walk this razor's edge. The descent into the mind is necessary, but not final. It's the purification before the integration, the night before dawn. Jung's warning was never meant to frighten you, but to remind you that consciousness demands responsibility. To think deeply is to carry fire, and fire, if mishandled, consumes its bearer first. The question now is not how deep you go, but how fully you can return. Every deep thinker eventually faces a choice: descend further into thought or begin to return. Most never return. They mistake depth for destiny and keep digging until the light disappears. But Jung understood something profound. Thinking is not the end of consciousness, it's only the beginning. The goal is not to live in the mind, but to pass through it. You must bring what you've discovered below the surface back into the daylight of life. Otherwise, your insight dies as a dream that never awakens. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong task of becoming whole. It's the reconciliation of opposites within you: intellect and instinct, light and shadow, order and chaos. He believed that every person carries within them the seed of the self, a deeper intelligence that wants to unite these fragments into harmony. But the ego resists. It clings to control, to ideas, to identity. It would rather be certain than alive. The deep thinker's greatest challenge is learning to surrender the very mind that once kept him safe. You must stop worshipping clarity. Life is not made to be perfectly understood, it's made to be participated in. Jung often said that meaning grows from the tension of opposites, not from their resolution. When you stop demanding certainty, you create space for intuition, emotion, and instinct to breathe again. This is where the real transformation begins. Not through new thoughts, but through living symbols. These are experiences, not theories. Love, loss, art, creation. They are how the unconscious speaks, and the deep thinker must learn to listen with more than intellect. Consider what happens when you create something. Write, paint, build, compose. The mind becomes silent, the inner critic dissolves, and something larger moves through it. Jung believed this was the self, expressing itself through form. It's not about talent, it's about allowing the psyche to externalize what it cannot explain. Many thinkers avoid this because it feels messy, irrational. But the irrational is sacred. It's the bridge between knowing and being. Creation is not an escape from the mind, it's the integration of it. Another way to return from the abyss is through relationship. Not shallow connection, but genuine encounter. Jung observed that we don't become conscious by introspection alone. We need mirrors, people who reflect the hidden aspects of ourselves. Every conflict, every attraction, every resentment reveals a part of our psyche projected outward. To withdraw from others is to remain blind to half of who we are. The deep thinker must learn to meet others not as ideas to analyze, but as souls to recognize. True understanding requires communion, not observation. There's a quiet danger in believing you can evolve alone. Isolation feels safe. It keeps the unpredictable world at a distance. But Jung's work shows that the psyche cannot unfold in a vacuum. Individuation happens in the world, not apart from it. The thinker must bring this insight into contact with experience, through work, love, failure, art, and service. Otherwise, thought becomes stagnant. It feeds on itself. The soul, deprived of real life, begins to rot beneath the weight of its own brilliance. Stop hiding in thought. Stop fearing your own vitality. Jung warned that when intellect becomes dominant, instinct retaliates. It erupts in chaos, addiction, or depression. The remedy is not less depth, but more embodiment. Walk, move, feel the seasons change. Let the body remind you of what the mind forgets, that you are not just a witness to life, you are part of its rhythm. Thinking deeply doesn't mean detaching from existence, it means perceiving its patterns more clearly, so you can participate with awareness, not with avoidance. Individuation demands courage, the courage to live what you know. Jung called this holding the tension of opposites. It means allowing contradiction to exist within you without forcing a premature answer. You can be wise and uncertain, strong and wounded, disciplined and wild. The goal is not purity, but wholeness. Every part of you belongs. The logical, the emotional, the shadowed, the divine. Integration begins when you stop exiling pieces of yourself and start inviting them to speak. The deep thinker's task is not to perfect the self, but to unite it. There's one more lesson Jung left for those who think deeply. You are not your thoughts. The mind is a tool, not a master. Thoughts are ripples on the surface of a far deeper consciousness. When you identify with them completely, you live in illusion. When you observe them without attachment, you enter awareness. Jung's individuation is not the destruction of the ego, it's its rightful place. The ego becomes a servant of the self, not its substitute. You think, but you are more than your thinking. You feel, but you are more than your feeling. To live this truth, you must practice stillness, not as escape, but as orientation. Sit quietly and observe the movement of thought without chasing it. Watch as ideas rise and fall like waves. In that space between thoughts, you'll begin to sense something beyond them, the awareness that witnesses both light and shadow without fear. Jung saw this state as the beginning of wisdom, when consciousness recognizes itself as part of a greater totality. The deep thinker's liberation begins when he realizes that even his most profound thought is just a fragment of that whole. And when you begin to live this way, everything changes. You no longer think to control life, you think to understand it, to harmonize with it. You no longer chase meaning, you participate in it. You no longer fear your darkness, you integrate it. You no longer isolate, you connect. Depth no longer feels like drowning. It feels like breathing underwater. Jung's warning was never about avoiding the mind's depths. It was about remembering to surface again and again, carrying the treasures you found there into the light of day. So, if you're a deep thinker, stop these 7 things. Not because they make you weak, but because they keep you trapped in your own brilliance. Stop overanalyzing. Stop carrying the world. Stop searching for meaning in every corner. Stop confusing solitude with strength. Stop mistaking knowledge for wisdom. And stop glorifying your darkness. Stop believing you're already awakened. Each one of these habits protects you from pain, but also from life. And every time you break one, you take a step closer to becoming whole. The world needs thinkers who have gone into the depths and returned with humility, not pride. Who have touched the darkness and chosen light, not out of ignorance, but out of understanding. You cannot save the world by thinking more clearly. You save it by living more consciously. Jung's final message was simple yet terrifying. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. But the pain of awakening is the price of freedom, and the alternative, unconscious existence, is a quiet death disguised as comfort. Remember this, the mind is a lantern, not the sun. Its light can guide you through the forest, but it can never replace the dawn. When you let the self, not the ego, take the lead, thinking becomes service and depth becomes strength. Jung's warning remains for all who dare to look within. The abyss will stare back, but if you face it with courage, it will eventually reflect your light. The herd will always obey. The world will always distract, but you have a choice. Freedom begins when you stop hiding in thought and start living what you know. If you have any thoughts on today's episode, I'd love to hear them. Leave me a message in the comments section below. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button for me and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys next time.